Sarah Yamamoto had been taught exactly what the White Devils would do to her. The propaganda officers in Tokyo had been very specific, very detailed, very terrifying. American soldiers would torture Japanese prisoners. They would rape the women. They would pass them between units like cigarettes. They would make them into comfort slaves, using them until their bodies broke and their minds shattered. Death was preferable. Suicide was honorable. Surrender was the end of everything that made you human. But nobody had mentioned the bacon. The mess hall tent at Crystal City internment camp smelled like a dream Sarah didn't know she was allowed to have. It was 6 in the morning on an April day in 1945, and the Texas sun was already streaming through the canvas flaps in thick golden bars that cut through the rising steam from the cooking grills. The sound was wrong for a prison camp. Soldiers were laughing. Metal spatulas scraped against hot griddles. A coffee percolator bubbled and hissed like it had all the time in the world. And underneath it all, constant and hypnotic, was the sizzle of pork fat crisping in its own rendered grease. Sarah stood in a line with 50 other Japanese women. They had been captured somewhere in the Pacific. The location didn't matter anymore. Everything was mud and blood and screaming, and then it was over, and then there were ships and trains, and now this place. This alien flat landscape that stretched forever under a sky too big to comprehend. They hadn't eaten in 3 days. Not since the processing station in California, where the guards had sprayed them with white powder that made them cough and stripped them naked under cold water, while other guards watched with bored expressions. Mary Tanaka stood next to Sarah, gripping her arm hard enough to bruise. Mary was maybe 40, maybe 50. It was hard to tell. The war had carved years into her face. She had been a teacher in Osaka. Now she was a prophet of doom. "Do not eat," Mary hissed in Japanese, her breath hot against Sarah's ear. "It is poison, or worse, they are fattening us, making us healthy before they use us." The line shuffled forward. Sarah could see the American cook now. He wore a stained white apron over his uniform. Corporal Martinez, his name tape said. He had dark skin and an easy smile, and hands that moved with the casual confidence of a man who had cooked 1,000 breakfasts and would cook 1,000 more. He was humming something, a song Sarah didn't recognize, something with a rhythm that matched the sizzle of the bacon. The woman in front of Sarah received her tray. 4 strips of thick-cut bacon, 2 fried eggs with yolks still runny, a pile of shredded potatoes fried golden brown, 2 pieces of white toast with butter already melting into the bread, a tin cup of coffee with real cream swirling on the surface. "Next," Martinez called out. Sarah stepped forward. Her hands shook as she held out her metal tray. Martinez didn't leer. He didn't grab. He didn't do any of the things Sarah had been taught to expect. He just scooped bacon onto her tray with the same easy motion he'd used for the woman before her. The eggs slid off his spatula with a wet sound. The potatoes made a small mountain. The toast landed with a soft thump. "Eat up, ma'am," he said, and his voice was respectful, almost kind. "Gonna be a hot one today." Ma'am, he had called her ma'am. Devils didn't say ma'am. Sarah stared at the tray. Her stomach was a knot of hunger and fear. The bacon glistened with fat. Little bubbles of grease still popped on the surface. The smell was overwhelming. Hickory smoke and salt and something rich and fundamental that spoke directly to the animal part of her brain that didn't care about propaganda or honor or anything except the fact that she was starving. What would happen when Sarah tasted American bacon? The answer would change everything she believed about the enemy. But first she had to make a choice that would mark her forever. Mary's voice cut through her thoughts. "They are making us healthy, strong, before they pass us to the soldiers. This is how it begins, with kindness, with food. Then the masks come off." Other women were already sitting at the long wooden tables. Some refused to touch their trays. They sat with arms crossed, faces set in masks of rigid defiance. Others were crying silently, tears running down their cheeks as they stared at food they didn't dare eat. And one girl, maybe 16, had already broken. She was eating with her hands, shoving eggs and potatoes into her mouth while she wept. Sarah found a spot at the end of a table. She set her tray down carefully. The bacon was still making that soft crackling sound. Little whispers of heat death. She could see the crystallized salt on the surface. The meat was striped with white fat and deep red lean. It curved slightly from the heat. Steam rose from it in delicate wisps. She picked up a strip with trembling fingers. The texture was wrong for anything she knew. Crispy on the outside, but the fat underneath was still soft, warm. The grease coated her fingertips. The smell up close was even stronger. Smoke and salt and pork and something else. Something that might have been America itself distilled into meat. Mary gasped. Other women turned to look. Sarah bit down. The bacon crunched between her teeth. Then the fat melted. Salt exploded across her tongue. The smoke flavor came next, slow and deep. The pork itself was sweet underneath it all. Rich. Unlike anything in Japanese cuisine. This wasn't food for survival. This was food for pleasure. Food that said you deserved more than just enough. Food that said someone cared if you enjoyed your breakfast. If this is poison, Sarah thought, why does it taste like kindness? She ate the whole strip, then another. Then the eggs breaking the yolks with her fork and watching the yellow run into the potatoes. Then the toast crispy and buttery and soft all at once. Then the coffee bitter and hot and awakening. Mary stood up so fast her bench scraped against the floor. Kigara, she spat, tainted, polluted, unclean. Other women stared. Some looked away quickly. Others watched with the careful attention of people witnessing a boundary being crossed. Sarah drank her coffee. It burned all the way down. Sarah's decision to eat that bacon would mark her as an outcast among her own people, but it would also save her life in ways she couldn't imagine. Because watching from a tower 50 yards away, tracking her every movement through Army-issue binoculars, was a man who had already decided he would die before he let another Japanese girl disappear. Corporal James Carson was 23 years old, and he had already seen too much. He stood in the watchtower overlooking the mess hall with his rifle slung over his shoulder and his hands braced against the railing and his eyes locked on one girl in a sea of identical khaki uniforms. She reminded him of Katie. His little sister back home in San Antonio was 18. Blonde where this girl was dark. American where this girl was enemy. Safe where this girl was anything but. But they had the same lost look. The same way of holding themselves like they expected the world to hit them and were just waiting to find out when and how hard. Jim had grown up on the Carson Ranch outside San Antonio. 500 acres of scrubland and cattle and sky that went on forever. His father raised beef. His mother raised children. Katie was the youngest, the baby, the one who cried when Jim enlisted in 1943 after Pearl Harbor turned the world inside out. "Don't lose yourself over there, Jimmy," she'd written in her last letter. "Come home the same person who left." But that person was gone, burned away in the caves of Leyte, drowned in the mud of Okinawa. Jim had seen things, done things, the kind of things that lived behind your eyes and waited for you to close them at night. He'd killed men, boys really, 17, 18 years old. They'd charged at him with bayonets and he'd shot them and watched them fall and kept shooting until they stopped moving. That was war. That was what you did. But the caves, God, the caves, they'd been clearing resistance near Shuri. Jim's squad had found a family hiding in a tomb, a mother, 3 children, the oldest, maybe 12. They'd called for them to come out, used the interpreter, promised food and safety, and from inside the darkness they'd heard screaming. Not the screaming of people being hurt, the screaming of people hurting themselves. By the time they got inside, the mother had used a straight razor to cut her own throat. The children huddled around her body, alive but catatonic, covered in her blood. The propaganda had done this. The Japanese military had told these people that Americans were devils, monsters, that capture meant torture and rape and fates worse than death. So they chose death. They chose razors and grenades and leaps from cliffs. They chose to kill their own children rather than let the Americans have them. And they were wrong. The propaganda was a lie. But by the time they learned that it was too late, Jim hadn't been able to save that woman. But he'd been rotated stateside in April for what the Army called rest duty, posted to Crystal City, given a tower and a rifle, and told to watch prisoners who weren't really prisoners. Civilians, displaced persons, people caught in the machine. When Sarah had come through processing 2 weeks ago, Jim had seen her face, terrified, certain she was about to experience horrors beyond imagination. And he'd made a decision right then. He would watch her. He would keep her real. He would make sure she didn't disappear into the darkness like that woman with the razor. If I can keep one of them from disappearing, he thought, maybe it counts for something. Maybe it balances the ledger. His field journal lay open on the small shelf built into the tower. The entry from this morning was still wet. April 15, 1945. New batch of prisoners today. One girl, maybe 19, looks like Katie. Same lost eyes. I keep thinking about the ones in the quiz, the ones we couldn't save. If I can keep one of them from disappearing, maybe it counts. He didn't write about how watching her made him feel, how it was the only thing that made sense anymore, how his hands shook when he wasn't in the tower where he could see her and know she was still breathing. Sergeant Buck Wheeler climbed up the tower ladder. He was 40 old for an enlisted man with a face like weathered leather and eyes that had seen everything twice. "Kid, you're gonna burn a hole in that girl with your eyes," Buck said, pulling out a cigarette. "Just doing my job," Jim said. "Your job is watching the wire, not watching her." Jim didn't answer. Buck lit his smoke and exhaled slowly. "She remind you of someone, Katie, my sister." "Your sister's blonde, American, safe at home." "I know." Buck was quiet for a moment. "What happened in those caves that wasn't your fault?" "I know that too." "Do you buy?" Jim didn't answer. Down below, Sarah was finishing her breakfast. She ate slowly, carefully, like each bite was a choice she was making. Other women had refused the food entirely, but she ate. She chose life. "They told her we were devils," Jim said quietly, and she's eating anyway. She's choosing to believe the propaganda might be wrong. That's good. What happens when she figures out I'm watching her? What's she gonna think?" Buck took another drag. "Probably that you're a devil after all." Jim Carson didn't know it yet, but his silent protection would lead to a moment he'd regret for the rest of his short life. A moment that would cost him everything. A moment that would begin with a storm and end with a choice between desire and honor. If you or your family served during World War II, especially if you encountered Japanese prisoners of war in Texas or anywhere else, share your story in the comments below. What you are about to hear is a true account of honor, sacrifice, and the moment when enemy became human. You will discover why a Texas cowboy gave up his life for a Japanese prisoner. You will learn the secret that Sarah kept for 70 years. And you will understand why one breakfast changed the course of two families forever. But first you need to understand what Crystal City was, what it meant, and why this place was different from everything Sarah had been taught to expect. Crystal City internment camp sat in the scrubland of South Texas, about halfway between San Antonio and the Mexican border. It had been built in 1942 to house enemy aliens. Germans, Japanese, Italians. Some were prisoners of war. Others were civilians rounded up from American cities after Pearl Harbor. Families mostly. People whose only crime was having the wrong last name when the world went crazy. By April of 1945, the war in Europe was ending. Hitler was in his bunker. The Russians were in Berlin, but the Pacific was still a meat grinder. Okinawa was happening right now, the bloodiest battle of the Pacific War. General Simon Bolivar Buckner was throwing everything he had at the Japanese 32nd Army. Young Americans were dying in mud so thick it drowned wounded men where they fell. And their enemies, when captured, arrived in places like Crystal City, confused, terrified, certain they were about to experience the tortures they'd been promised. Instead, they got bacon for breakfast. Sarah had been born in 1926 in the suburbs of Tokyo. Her father worked for the railroad. Her mother taught piano. Sarah had wanted to be a nurse. She'd enrolled in a program, started training. Then the war came and swallowed everything. The Imperial Army needed nurses. Volunteers were requested, strongly requested, the kind of request you didn't refuse. She'd been assigned to a field hospital somewhere in the Pacific. The location was classified. Not that it mattered. All the islands blurred together, mud and jungle and the constant thunder of American naval guns turning everything to pulp. The hospital had been overrun during an American advance. Sarah had run, hidden, been captured by Marines who looked at her with exhaustion and something like pity. The propaganda had been very specific, very detailed, but it had also been very wrong. The Marines had given her water, a blanket, an MRE that she'd been too scared to eat. They'd put her on a truck with other prisoners, then a ship. then trains across America, through landscapes so vast and empty they hurt her eyes, until finally Texas, Crystal City, a camp surrounded by barbed wire but also containing baseball fields and vegetable gardens and children playing in the dust. This wasn't a death camp. It was something else entirely. Something Sarah didn't have words for yet. The morning routine at Crystal City started at 6. Bugle call echoing across the compound. The same melody every day. American military ritual. Sarah learned to recognize it, to let it pull her from dreams of home that hurt more than nightmares. Breakfast was different every day. Pancakes with syrup on Wednesdays. Biscuits and gravy on Fridays. Always coffee. Always bacon or sausage. Always more food than Sarah had seen in the last year of war in Japan. After breakfast, work assignments. Sarah was put on a detail sorting medical supplies near the main gate. Cotton bandages, glass bottles of medicine, boxes of sulfa powder. American abundance made physical. More supplies in one tent than entire Japanese field hospitals had seen. The guards were casual, young men smoking cigarettes and talking about baseball. They didn't watch the prisoners with hatred. Mostly they didn't watch them at all. They seemed bored. Like guarding enemy aliens was a job that rated somewhere below interesting and above sleeping. Around mid-morning, one of the guards brought out a wooden crate filled with glass bottles. Ice cold, condensation running down the sides. "Coke," he said, holding one out to Sarah. "You ever had Coke?" She shook her head. He popped the cap with an opener attached to his belt, handed it to her. "Try it, it's good." Sarah took the bottle. The glass was so cold it almost hurt to hold. She raised it to her lips, tilted. Carbonation exploded in her mouth. Sweetness followed, a flavor she couldn't name, something between caramel and vanilla and battery acid and joy. The bubbles burned her throat going down. The sugar hit her bloodstream like a drug. The guard grinned. "Good right, Yes," Sarah managed, her first word of English to an American. "Good. This is what freedom tastes like," she thought, and immediately felt guilty for thinking it. At lunch, they got sandwiches, white bread, ham, cheese, lettuce, mayonnaise. Each ingredient separate and distinct. Sarah had never eaten a sandwich before. Didn't know you were supposed to bite through all the layers at once. She took it apart, examined each piece, tasted them separately. The bread was impossibly soft, the ham was salty, the cheese was sharp. Together, they made something greater than their parts. American soldiers demonstrated basic things: how to use a fork properly, how the coffee percolator worked, how to throw a baseball, though most of the women had no interest. But the demonstrations were patient, kind. Nobody yelled, nobody hit, nobody did any of the things Sarah had been taught to expect. In the afternoon, there was music. Someone had a radio. Country music drifted across the compound. Twangy guitars and nasal voices singing about lost love and open roads. It was alien, strange, but somehow also welcoming, like it was making room for her in its world. And through it all, every day, all day, there was a man watching from a tower. Sarah felt him before she saw him, a weight on the back of her neck, a prickling awareness that she was being observed, inventoried, assessed. She looked up during a water break, scanned the towers, found him. He stood in the southeast tower, tall, broad shoulders, a cowboy hat pushed back on his head against the Texas sun. His face was too far away to read clearly, but she could see his eyes, even from 50 yards. They were locked on her, not leering, not hungry, but intense. Like he was afraid if he looked away, she would cease to exist. Sarah's heart hammered. Mary had warned her about this, about being selected, about guards marking their prey and waiting for the right moment. But this didn't feel like predation. It felt like something else. Protection, maybe. Vigilance. She didn't have a word for it. She looked back down at her work. Tried to ignore him, but the weight of his gaze remained. At the end of the day, the women were herded back to their barracks. Long tents with rows of cots, thin blankets, communal latrines. Mary claimed the cot next to Sarah's. "He watches you," Mary said in Japanese, her voice low and urgent. "Every day. The tall one in the southeast tower. He has marked you." "What does that mean?" It means he is the shoko, the officer who gets first choice. The others will wait until he is finished with you. This is how it begins. Sarah pulled her blanket up to her chin. He has not approached me. Not yet. They are patient. They wait until you trust them, until you think you are safe. Then the masks come off. Other women were listening. Sarah could feel their attention, some sympathetic, others calculating. If Sarah was marked, that meant they might be safe, at least for now. He is just doing his job, Sarah said, though she didn't believe it herself. Mary's laugh was bitter. A devil is still a devil even if he washes you before he eats you. Sarah closed her eyes, tried to sleep, but all she could see was the guard in the tower, his eyes locked on her. Not with lust, not with hatred, with something else entirely. Why was this soldier watching her? What did he want, and why did his presence feel less like a threat and more like a promise? The days developed a rhythm. Wake, bugle, breakfast, work, lunch, work, dinner, sleep, and always the man in the tower. Jim never spoke to her, never waved, never acknowledged her existence except through the steady pressure of his gaze. Sarah found herself looking for him, making sure he was there. Some deep animal part of her brain had decided that as long as he was watching, she was safe, which made no sense. He was the enemy, a guard, a devil according to everything she'd been taught. But devils didn't give you Coca-Cola. Devils didn't serve you bacon and eggs. Devils didn't watch you with eyes that looked more afraid than threatening. On her 5th day at Crystal City, Sarah was carrying the water containers from the pump to the supply tent. The work was hard. The containers were heavy. The Texas heat was brutal. Sweat soaked through her camp-issued shirt. She passed near the southeast tower during a shift change. Jim was descending the ladder. His boots rang on the metal rungs. He reached the ground just as Sarah walked past. They were maybe 10 feet apart. Jim pulled something from his pocket, a brown wrapper. He placed it on the fence post without looking at her. Then he kept walking, didn't turn around, didn't acknowledge what he'd done. Sarah stared at the fence post, at the small rectangular package sitting there. Mary appeared at her elbow. Do not touch it. It is bait. But Sarah picked it up anyway. The wrapper crinkled in her hands. Hershey's, it said. Chocolate. She unwrapped it slowly. The chocolate was dark brown, broken into squares. She broke off a piece, put it in her mouth. Sweetness exploded. Rich, deep. Nothing like the bitter, unsweetened chocolate she'd had in Japan. This was sugar and cocoa and milk and something that might have been happiness distilled into solid form. Tears ran down her face. She didn't know why. It was just chocolate. Just a candy bar from a guard who probably handed them out to prisoners every day. But it felt like something else, like a message, like proof that maybe the propaganda had been wrong about everything. 50 yards away, Sergeant Buck Wheeler watched Jim walk away from the fence. Kid's got it bad, Buck said to another guard. She's the enemy, the other guard said. Buck shrugged. She's 19 and scared, same as my daughter back home. It's still wrong. Probably, but which part? Treating her like a human or treating her like the enemy? The other guard didn't answer. Jim climbed back up to his tower, pulled out his journal, wrote quickly before the emotion faded. May 5, 1945. Still watching her. Gunny says I'm obsessed. Maybe I am. But when I look at her, I see all the ones we didn't save. The woman with the razor, the children covered in their mother's blood. If I look away, I see them instead. At least this way I'm seeing someone alive. Someone who might stay that way. As long as I keep watching, she's real. She stays in the world. He closed the journal, scanned the compound, found Sarah near the water pump. She was eating the chocolate, crying while she ate. Jim's hands tightened on the tower railing. She wasn't supposed to cry. The chocolate was supposed to make her happy, or at least less scared. But maybe they were happy tears. Maybe she'd been told for so long that Americans were monsters that kindness itself had become shocking. He would keep watching, keep her real, keep her safe, even if she never knew his name. Sarah's decision to accept the chocolate marked another line crossed, another boundary transgressed. Mary stopped speaking to her directly. The other women gave her space. Not hostile exactly, but careful, like she carried a contagion they didn't want to catch. Sarah didn't care, or told herself she didn't. The isolation hurt, But the chocolate had been real. The bacon had been real. The Coca-Cola had been real. Whatever was happening here, it wasn't what she'd been told to expect. And the guard in the tower kept watching. Every day, all day, his eyes following her like she was the most important thing in his world. It should have terrified her. Instead, it became a strange comfort, a constant. As long as she could look up and see him there, the world made a kind of sense. He was watching over her, not watching for her. The distinction mattered. Then came the news from the war. May crept toward June. Guards arrived and departed. Fresh faces rotated in from the Pacific. They brought stories, updates, news that filtered through the camp like poison gas. "Okinawa's a meat grinder," one fresh guard said at dinner, his voice carrying across the mess hall. "Shuri line's worse than anything in Europe. Mud so thick it drowns you. Japs fighting from caves. Won't surrender. Just keep coming." Another guard nodded. "Heard the 77th Infantry got chewed up at Sugarloaf Ridge. Casualties in the thousands. Even the cooks are getting hit. Martinez, that guy from Texas, lost his leg to shrapnel." Sarah didn't understand all the English, but she caught key words. Okinawa, 77th Infantry, casualties. Her stomach dropped. The guard in the tower wore the 77th Infantry patch on his shoulder. She'd seen it through the fence. That was his unit, his brothers. They were dying in mud half a world away while he stood in a tower watching her. Was he safe here or was he going back? That night, Sarah lay on her cot and tried to picture the guard's face clearly. She'd only seen him up close once, during the shift change. He'd looked tired, haunted, older than his years, but also young, maybe 23, not much older than her. If her sister Katie had been captured by Americans, what would Sarah want them to do? Beat her, rape her, or give her bacon and chocolate and watch over her to make sure she didn't disappear? The answer was obvious. The guilt that followed was crushing. She'd been taught to hate Americans, to fear them, to believe they were devils incarnate. But the evidence said otherwise. The bacon said otherwise. The chocolate said otherwise. The guard in the tower said otherwise. What if everything had been a lie? What if her own government had lied to keep people like her from surrendering, from choosing life over death? How many had died believing the lie? How many had chosen razors and cliffs and grenades because they believed capture was worse? Sarah rolled over, pressed her face into her thin pillow. Didn't let herself cry because Mary would hear and judge, and that would make it worse. But the questions remained, unanswered, unanswerable. Late May brought the storms. Texas thunderstorms that made Okinawa typhoons look tame. The sky turned colors that didn't belong in nature. Green-black, purple-gray. The air got thick and electric and wrong. "Storm coming," one guard called out. "Everybody secure loose equipment. Get to shelter when you hear the sirens." Sarah's detail was working near the supply depot. Canvas tents full of bandages and medicine and equipment. They scrambled to tie down the flaps, drive stakes deeper, reinforce guy lines that were already starting to hum in the rising wind. Thunder rolled across the flat landscape. Lightning flickered on the horizon. The temperature dropped 10 degrees in 5 minutes. Sarah had experienced storms before, typhoons in Japan, monsoons in the Pacific. But this felt different, more violent, more personal. Like the sky itself was angry. The wind picked up. Tent flaps snapped like rifle shots. Dust devils spun across the compound. Guards shouted orders that got torn away by the wind. Jim Carson was not in his tower. He was on patrol, walking the perimeter with his rifle and his eyes scanning constantly, and his mind half here and half in Okinawa where his real brothers were dying in mud. He saw the storm coming, recognized the signs, the green sky, the wall cloud forming to the west. This was tornado weather, the kind of weather that picked up houses and dropped them miles away. "Everybody to the shelters," he called out. "Now, this one's going to be bad." The sirens started, a rising, falling wail that cut through the wind. Women ran for the barracks. Guards herded them along. Standard procedure. Get everyone under cover and wait it out. But Sarah was still at the supply depot, still trying to secure a canvas tent that was fighting like a living thing. 3 other women helped her. They had the guy lines almost tied when the artillery shell hit. It wasn't aimed at the camp. It came from a test range 20 miles away. A stray round fired at maximum elevation that traveled farther than anyone calculated. The odds of it hitting Crystal City were astronomical. The odds of it hitting the exact moment a storm arrived were impossible. But it happened anyway. The shell hit the fence 50 yards from the supply depot. The explosion wasn't huge, not compared to naval bombardment or carpet bombing, but it was close and loud. And the concussion wave knocked Sarah off her feet. She hit the ground hard, tasted blood, heard ringing. Then the main tent pole snapped, overstressed by wind and concussion and bad luck. It broke with a sound like a gunshot, and the entire canvas structure collapsed. Heavy wet canvas fell on Sarah and two other women. The weight was immense, suffocating. Sarah tried to push up, but the fabric just absorbed her strength, trapped her, pressed her face into the mud. She couldn't breathe, couldn't move, couldn't scream because there was no air. The canvas was drowning her, the weight crushing her chest, the darkness absolute. This is how it ends, she thought. Not the devil's torture, not the expected horror, just stupid bad luck in heavy canvas and Texas mud. Then she heard it, a voice cutting through the storm. "I got you! Hold on!" Light exploded, a knife flashed, canvas parted, hands grabbed her shoulders, pulled, dragged. Sarah gasped. Air rushed into her lungs, rain hit her face. She was moving, being hauled through mud and wind and cake. Then solid steel against her back, the side of a truck, a wall between her and the storm, and a body shielding her. Warm, real, human. Jim Carson pressed Sarah against the truck and used his own body to block the wind and rain. His helmet light illuminated both their faces in harsh white. His hands were on her shoulders, not grabbing, steadying. "Are you hurt?" he shouted over the storm. "Can you talk?" Sarah stared at him, really saw him for the first time. Mud streaked his face. Rain ran into his eyes. He looked terrified, not for himself, for her. "Are you hurt?" he said again, slower, like maybe she didn't understand English. She shook her head. "No, not hurt, just scared, just alive." His hands moved from her shoulders to her face, checking for injuries. Professional. Medical. His touch was gentle. His eyes searched hers. All the loneliness Sarah had carried since leaving Japan crashed over her. All the fear, all the confusion, all the impossible weight of being enemy and human and alone in a place where nothing made sense. This man had saved her life. With bacon, with chocolate. Now this. He'd pulled her from darkness. He'd made her real. He'd proven that the propaganda was a lie, and he was warm and solid and right here. And the only thing in the world that made sense. Sarah didn't think. Thinking would have stopped her. She just acted. She grabbed the front of his wet uniform jacket, used it to pull herself up on her toes, and kissed him. For 2 seconds, Jim froze. Complete stillness. His brain trying to process what was happening. Enemy, prisoner, duty, honor, Katie, the razor woman. Everything colliding at once. Then he kissed her back. His hand moved from her shoulder to the side of her face, cupping her cheek. His other hand pressed against the small of her back, drawing her closer. The rain hammered down. Thunder rolled overhead. Lightning turned the world white. And for 5 impossible seconds, none of it mattered. War, race, duty, nation, it all disappeared. There was just 2 people. 2 terrified, lonely people finding each other in the storm. Sarah pressed closer. This is real. This is safe. This is everything. The solid warmth of him, the gentleness of his touch despite his strength, the way he held her like she was precious, like she mattered. She wanted more. Needed this to be everything. Needed it to erase the war and the fear and the crushing weight of being alive when so many were dead. Then Jim tore himself away. He stumbled back like she'd burned him. His face in the lightning showed pure horror. Self-directed. Absolute. "No," he choked out. "God, no. What am I doing?" Sarah stared, her lips still tingling, rain hitting her face where his hand had been, the cold rushing back in where his warmth had been. "Get back to your tent," Jim ordered. but his voice was broken, shaking. Go, Ike, now, it's not safe here. He wouldn't look at her, he pointed into the rain. His hand trembled. Sarah stood frozen. The rejection hurt worse than any blow. She'd expected violation, expected the guard to take what he could. That's what devils did. That's what the propaganda promised. But he'd refused. He'd chosen nothing over everything. Why would a man who could take anything choose nothing? Go, Jim said again, softer, desperate. Please, Wahi. Sarah turned, ran into the storm. The mud sucked at her boots, rain blinded her. But she ran anyway, away from the man who'd saved her and refused her and proven that everything she'd been taught was wrong. Behind her, Jim leaned his head against the truck, his fists clenched, his breath ragged. I can't, he whispered to the storm. I won't. She's a prisoner. I'm a soldier. I'm supposed to protect her, not do that. 100 yards away, Mary Tanaka watched from the barracks doorway. She'd seen them go to the truck, seen them huddled together in the dark, seen Sarah run back alone looking broken. The violation had finally come. Mary was sure of it, and now Sarah would learn the truth about American kindness, about bacon and chocolate and all the lies wrapped in sweetness. But why did the girl look heartbroken instead of violated? Why did she look like she'd been rejected instead of used? Mary didn't understand, but she knew one thing with absolute certainty. Sarah Yamamoto was Kajeri now, tainted beyond redemption. And everyone would know by morning. The next day, Jim Carson walked into the camp commandant's office, stood at attention, made his request in a voice that allowed no questions. Sir, requesting immediate transfer back to my combat unit. The commandant looked up from his paperwork. You sure, Corporal, you earned this rest? I need to be with my unit, sir. They're still out there. I should be too. The commandant studied him, saw something in the young soldier's face, something desperate. He'd seen it before. Men running from things they couldn't name. Request approved. You ship out tomorrow morning. Rejoin the 77th on Okinawa. Thank you, sir. Jim saluted, turned, walked out before the commandant could ask why a man would volunteer to go back to a meat grinder. That afternoon, Sarah saw him leaving, duffel bag over his shoulder, walking toward the motor pool and the trucks that would take him away. Their eyes met across 50 yards of mud and wire. She saw recognition, saw regret, saw something that might have been an apology. Then he turned away, climbed into a truck, disappeared behind canvas. The watchtower stood empty. A new guard took over the next day, young, bored. He read comic books and smoked cigarettes and didn't watch any of the prisoners with anything except casual indifference. Sarah felt unmoored, invisible. The one human connection she'd found in this upside-down world had been severed by its own intensity. And Mary was waiting with accusations that would turn Sarah from outcast into pariah. That would teach her the final lesson about what happens to Japanese girls who believe in American kindness. Jim Carson was running from shame, but he was running toward death. And Sarah would be the only one to know the whole truth when the blood-stained pages of his journal fell into her hands weeks later, telling a story of honor and sacrifice that would change everything she understood about devils and angels and the thin line between them. The morning after the storm, Crystal City woke to a changed world. The rain had stopped. The sky was that bright, washed blue that only comes after violence. Puddles reflected clouds. The air smelled clean, new, like the earth had been scrubbed of sin. But Sarah Yamamoto knew better. Sin didn't wash away. It just soaked deeper into the ground. She stood near the water pump at dawn before the bugle call before the other women woke. Her hands were raw from scrubbing. She'd spent an hour the night before trying to wash off the feeling of Jim's hands on her face, his lips on hers, the warmth of his body shielding her from the storm. But you couldn't wash off a memory. You could only carry it, like a stone in your pocket, like shame worn next to your skin. She'd kissed him. She, Sarah Yamamoto, enemy prisoner, had grabbed an American soldier and kissed him, had pressed herself against him like some desperate woman from the propaganda posters, had wanted more, had needed more, and he had run. The rejection was a living thing inside her chest. It had teeth. It bit every time she breathed. Around 7 in the morning, Sarah saw movement at the motor pool, soldiers loading duffel bags into trucks, the usual rotation, men coming and going, the war machine processing its parts. Then she saw him. Jim Carson walked across the compound with his bag over his shoulder, his rifle slung across his back. His face set in the blank expression soldiers wore when they were trying not to feel anything. He was leaving. Sarah's throat closed, her vision tunneled. He was leaving. The guard who had watched over her for 3 weeks, the man who had saved her twice, the only human connection she'd found in this alien place. He was walking away. Their eyes met across 50 yards of cleared ground. The distance might as well have been the Pacific Ocean. Unbridgeable. Absolute. Jim saw her. She knew he did. His step faltered. Just for a second. Just enough to prove he recognized her. Then he looked away, turned his face toward the trucks, kept walking. Sarah wanted to run after him, wanted to demand why, wanted to apologize, or curse him, or beg him not to go. But she stood frozen. Watched him climb into the back of a truck. Watched the canvas flap close behind him. Watched the truck start its engine and roll toward the gate. The watchtower stood empty, a cathedral without a god. Sarah realized she was crying only when Mary Tanaka appeared beside her. "So," Mary said in Japanese, her voice sharp as broken glass, "he got what he wanted, now he leaves." "It was not like that." "Was it not? Then explain why you cry. Explain why he runs." Sarah had no answers, or none that Mary would believe. By mid-morning, the new guard had taken over Jim's tower. He was maybe 19, fresh-faced. He brought comic books and a thermos of coffee and settled in like he was planning to spend the war reading about Superman. He didn't watch the prisoners, barely looked at them. They were just part of the landscape, background noise to his boredom. Sarah felt the absence like a wound. For 3 weeks, Jim's gaze had been her compass, the constant that proved she existed. She could look up any time and find him there, watching, keeping her real. Now there was just a bored teenager who didn't care if she lived or died. She was invisible again, unmoored, drifting. That afternoon, Mary made her move. The women were on latrine duty, digging new trenches to replace the ones the storm had flooded. Hard work, the kind that made your back scream and your hands blister. Sarah worked in silence, trying not to think, trying not to feel. Mary appeared with 3 other women, older women who remembered Tokyo, who remembered when Japan was winning, who held on to the propaganda because letting go would mean admitting everything they believed was a lie. "Yamamoto," Mary called out loud enough for everyone to hear, "we need to talk." Sarah straightened, wiped sweat from her face. "I am working. This cannot wait. It concerns your honor, or what is left of it." The other women stopped digging. 12 prisoners? 2 guards distant enough not to hear Japanese. Everyone suddenly very interested in what Mary had to say. "He took you," Mary said, not a question, a statement. "In the storm, the American guard, we saw you with him, saw you come back alone, broken. It was not like that." "Then tell us. Tell us why you disappeared with an American soldier. Why you came back crying, why he left the next day." Sarah's hands trembled. She gripped the shovel harder. "He saved my life. The tent collapsed. He pulled me out. That is all." "Liar," Mary spat the word. "We saw. You were with him for long minutes, alone in the dark. What does an American soldier do with a Japanese girl in the dark?" The trap was perfect. If Sarah said nothing happened, she was a liar. If she admitted to the kiss, she was a whore. Either way, she was condemned. "He did nothing I did not want," Sarah said quietly. The words fell like stones into still water, ripples spreading, faces changing, some shocked, some disgusted, some satisfied they'd been right all along. Mary's voice rose to a scream. "You wanted it. You wanted the American devil to touch you, to use you. You are Kagare Yamamoto, tainted beyond redemption. You smell of them. You reek of betrayal." "He did not use me," Sarah said. "I kissed him. He pushed me away and told me to go." The silence was absolute. Even the guards noticed. Turned to look. Didn't understand the language but recognized confrontation. Mary's face went white, then red. "You lie. American soldiers do not refuse. They take. That is what they do. That is what we were told." Then we were told wrong. The words hung in the air. Heresy, blasphemy, treason against everything the emperor's voice on the radio had promised, against the certainty that had let women choose razors over surrender, against the foundation of their entire understanding of the war. You are no longer one of us, Mary said. Each word precise, final. You are theirs now. Sleep at the edge of the tent. Do not touch our food. Do not speak to us. You are Kagare, unclean, dead to us. The other women nodded, some reluctantly, some eagerly, the herd protecting itself by exiling the sick. Sarah stood alone in a circle of judgment, her shovel in her hands, her truth too strange to be believed. She had been a prisoner to the Americans. Now she was a pariah to the Japanese. 2 cages, one made of wire, one made of hate. That night, Sarah moved her cot to the far corner of the tent, away from the others. The isolation was physical now, measurable in feet and inches. No one would share food with her, no one would speak to her. She was a ghost, present but unseen, breathing but dead. She lay on her cot and stared at the canvas ceiling and wondered if Jim was already in Okinawa, already back in the mud, already dying for a country that would never know his name. The news from Okinawa came in fragments, radio reports, newspaper headlines, guards talking. By late May, everyone knew the battle had become hell on earth. Shuri Line's a meat grinder, one guard said at breakfast. His voice carried across the mess hall. Worse fighting in the Pacific. Worse than Iwo. Mud so deep it swallows tanks. Another guard nodded. Heard the 77th Infantry is getting chewed up. They keep throwing them at the ridges, keep pulling back bodies. Sarah sat alone at her table. The other women gave her a wide berth, like she carried plague. She picked at her breakfast. The food had no taste anymore. 77th Infantry. That was Jim's unit. She'd seen the patch on his shoulder, the gold and black OSEC triangle. She didn't know what it meant, but she knew it marked him as one of the men dying in the mud half a world away. General Buckner himself is at the front, a third guard said. Old man won't stay in headquarters, keeps going up to the line, wants to see it with his own eyes. Sarah's English was better now. 3 weeks of total immersion. She understood most of what they said, understood that the battle was bad, that men were dying, that Jim's unit was in the worst of it. She prayed to gods she didn't believe in anymore. American gods, Japanese gods, any god who might be listening. Please let him live. Please bring him home, even if I never see him again. Please just let him live. But prayers felt empty, like shouting into a void. 2 days later, Lieutenant Rebecca Cohen came looking for Sarah, the nurse who had processed her, who had torn her shirt open with medical efficiency, who had looked at 50 terrified women and seen only work to be done. Yamamoto, Cohen said, consulting her clipboard, "You speak English now." "Some, yes." "Good. I need workers for a special detail, sorting personal effects, items from deceased soldiers. It's sensitive work. You'll be separated from the main camp, heavily supervised, but the work is important." Sarah nodded. Separated from the main camp meant separated from Mary, from the judgment, from the isolation that somehow felt worse than being alone. "You understand what you'll be doing. These are items from American soldiers killed in action. Letters, photos, personal effects. You'll sort them. Intelligence items separate from personal items. Can you do this?" "Yes." "You'll be handling the belongings of your enemies, men who died fighting your people. Can you do this with respect?" Sarah looked at Cohen, really looked at her, saw the exhaustion, the same weariness she'd seen in Jim's eyes. Everyone was tired. Everyone was done with the war. "I will do this with respect," Sarah said. Cohen nodded, made a mark on her clipboard. "Report to Tent 7 tomorrow morning, 6 a.m. Don't be late." That night, Sarah allowed herself a small measure of relief. A new job, a new space, a chance to be useful instead of just existing. And maybe if she was very lucky, she would find something in those items that would help her understand. That would explain why American soldiers gave her bacon for breakfast and then died in mud fighting her people. The next morning, Sarah reported to Tent 7. It was smaller than the main barracks, more like a storage area. Inside were tables, long wooden surfaces covered with items, letters, photos, journals, dog tags, watches, wallets, medals, flags, the last belongings of dead men. An older sergeant explained the job. His voice was rough but not unkind. Intelligence items go in the green boxes. Maps, orders, anything with Japanese writing. Anything that looks military, personal items go in the brown boxes. We send those to families, keep them separate. Work carefully. These men died serving their country. Show respect. Sarah nodded, sat at her assigned watch table. The sergeant handed her a crate. It was heavy, wooden, stained with dark marks that might have been water or might have been blood. She opened it. The smell hit her first. Mildew, decay, the sweet rot of things left too long in wet places. Inside were leather pouches, dozens of them, each one pulled from a dead soldier's body. Sarah's hands trembled as she reached for the first one. Inside was a wallet, photos of a smiling woman, a baby. A letter that started, "My dearest Tom." She set it in the brown box. Personal. The next pouch held dog tags and a map. The map went in the green box. Intelligence. The tags in the brown. Personal. She worked for hours. Each item was a story. A life. Tom had a wife and a baby in Nebraska. Michael collected coins from every place he'd been stationed. Robert wrote poetry to someone named Alice. James carried a photo of his mother and a recipe for apple pie written in her handwriting. They were not devils. They were boys, husbands, sons, brothers. They were human, and they were dead. Sarah felt the weight of it, the crushing realization that everyone in this war was human. Everyone had mothers who would cry, sisters who would wait, lives that mattered. The propaganda had lied about everything, not just about American soldiers being devils, but about the entire nature of the war, about who the enemy was, about what they were fighting for. These boys had died fighting for democracy, for freedom, for the right to go home to wives and babies and apple pie recipes. They hadn't died because they were monsters. They died because someone told them to, just like Japanese soldiers, just like everyone. Many of you have shared powerful stories in the comments about your fathers who served in the Pacific. One viewer wrote about finding his father's letters from Okinawa in the attic. If you have family letters or journals from World War II, this next part will hit home, because Sarah was about to discover something that would change everything. The secret hidden in blood-stained pages. What Jim never got to say. Why Sarah guarded this truth for 70 years. On her third day sorting personal effects, a new shipment arrived. 3 crates, fresh from Okinawa. The sergeant explained they'd been rushed through processing, bodies recovered from recent fighting. The label said 77th Infantry Division, May 1945. Sarah's hands froze on the crate she was opening. 77th, Jim's unit. The sergeant noticed her reaction. "You okay?" "Yes, sorry, I will work." She opened the first crate, more pouches, more letters, more photos. Tom and Michael and Robert and James, different versions. Same stories, same heartbreak. Then her fingers closed around something different. Not a leather pouch, a book. Small, hardcover, canvas, green. She pulled it out. Her heart stopped. It was an American field journal. Standard issue. The kind officers and educated soldiers kept. It was soaked, stained. The canvas cover was dark brown in places. Not water. Blood. Dried blood that had soaked into the fabric and turned it stiff. Sarah opened it with trembling hands. The first pages were ruined. Ink turned to blue-gray smears. Water damage. Rain or mud or blood had destroyed them. But deeper in, protected by the ruined pages, the writing was legible. Angular, strong, precise. She read the first clear entries she could find. Her English was good enough now, good enough to understand. May 17, 1945, got posted to Crystal City. Supposed to be rest, it's not. The girl from the processing line is here. I see her every day. Supposed to be watching the wire. Just watching her. When I look at her, I see the ones we didn't get to. The ones in the caves. Feel like if I look away, she'll just disappear. Like she's my fault. Sarah's breath caught. The handwriting. She'd seen Jim writing in a notebook once. Sitting in his tower. Pen moving across paper with the same angular precision. This was Jim Carson's journal. And it was in a crate of items from dead soldiers. Her vision grayed at the edges. The tent spun. She gripped the table to keep from falling. The journal was here, in the death pile, which meant Jim was dead. The sergeant looked over. "Hey, you need a break." Sarah shook her head, couldn't speak, slipped the journal under her shirt, against her stomach, hidden. The guards were looking away. They didn't care. There were hundreds of items, thousands. One small journal wouldn't be missed. She worked the rest of the day in a fog, sorting items she didn't see, thinking only about the small, hard shape pressed against her skin. Proof that Jim Carson had died. Proof that her prayer had gone unanswered. Proof that the man who saved her had gone back to the war and the war had killed him. That night, Sarah waited until the other women in her tent were asleep. She lit a stolen candle, opened the journal, and began to read. The early entries were from before the war, before Jim knew what war was. March 10th, 1943. Enlisted today. Pa wasn't happy. Katie cried. But someone's got to stop the Japs after Pearl Harbor. Besides, it's the right thing to do. America needs every man who can fight. I can fight. Sarah's throat tightened. He'd been so young, so certain, so convinced that war was about right and wrong, that it was simple, that you could kill the bad guys and go home a hero. June 15th, 1943. Basic training at Camp Bowie, Texas. Drill sergeant says I'm too soft, need to toughen up. Katie wrote me a letter. Don't lose yourself over there, Jimmy. Come home the same person who left. I will sis, I promise. But he hadn't. Sarah could see it in the handwriting. The early entries were neat, optimistic, full of hope. Then came the combat entries. The handwriting changed, got rougher, more jagged, like the hand holding the pen was shaking. December 20th, 1944. Leyte, first combat, first kill. He was maybe 17. Had a photo of his mother in his pocket. I threw up after. Sergeant Buck says that's normal. Says it gets easier. I don't want it to get easier. I don't want to be the kind of man who kills and doesn't feel sad. Sarah traced the words with her finger. He had killed Japanese soldiers, her people, but he had felt it, had mourned it, had carried the weight. March 5th, 1945. Okinawa, the caves. God, the caves. We found a family, woman and 3 kids. Used the interpreter. Told them to come out. Promised safety. Heard screaming inside. By the time we got in, her mother had used a razor blade to cut her own throat. The kids were covered in her blood. They told her we were devils. Made her believe death was better than surrender. They were wrong, but she's dead anyway. Can't unsee it. Can't unhear the sound. Sergeant Buck says don't think about it. But how do you not think about the worst thing you've ever seen? Sarah's tears fell on the page, smudging ink that was already smudged. This was the woman Jim talked about. The razor woman. The one who haunted him. Who made him watch Sarah like keeping her alive could somehow balance the ledger. April 15th, 1945. Got rotated stateside. Crystal City, Texas. Rest duty, they call it. But I don't feel rested. I feel guilty. Buck and the boys are still out there, still dying. And I'm here, safe, watching prisoners who aren't really prisoners. Civilians caught in the machine. Then came the entry about her. Sarah read it 3 times, memorizing every word. April 16, 1945. New batch of prisoners arrived today. One girl, maybe 19, Japanese. Looks like Katie. Same age. Same terrified eyes. What if Katie was captured? What would I want someone to do for her? Beat her, rape her, or give her a Hershey bar and make sure she doesn't disappear like the woman with the razor? I know what I want. I know what's right. So I'll watch her. I'll keep her real. Maybe it counts for something. He had seen his sister in her. That's why he watched. That's why he cared. Not because he wanted her, because he wanted to save someone. Anyone. One person who could be kept from disappearing. May 5, 1945, still watching her. Gunny says I'm obsessed. Maybe I am. But when I look at her, I see all the ones we didn't save. The woman with the razor, the children covered in blood. If I look away, I see them instead. At least this way, I'm seeing someone alive. Someone who might stay that way. As long as I keep watching, she's real. She stays in the world. Sarah pressed the journal to her chest, rocked slowly. He hadn't been a devil watching his prey. He'd been a broken soldier trying to save one person, trying to prove to himself that not everything had to end in blood. Then came the storm entry. Her hands shook so hard as she could barely hold the page. May 22nd, 1945. Hell of a storm tonight. Lightning, wind, rain like Okinawa. Artillery shell hit the wire. Stray round from somewhere. Tent collapsed. Found her trapped. Pulled her out. Got her to the truck. Tried to keep her warm. And then, Christ, I don't even know how to write this. Sarah held her breath. She kissed me. Not me forcing. Her kissing me. Grabbed my jacket and just kissed me. For about 2 seconds, I forgot everything. The caves, the screaming, all of it. Felt human for the first time in a year. Felt alive. Then I remembered what I am. What she is. Prisoner, soldier, guard, captive. If I'd kept going, I'd be everything they told her we were. I'd be the devil she was taught to fear. I would rather face a Nambu machine gun than become that. Pushed her away, told her to go, saw the look on her face. Like I'd hit her. But if I hadn't stopped, I'd have proven the propaganda right. I'd have taken advantage of a terrified prisoner. I'd have become the monster. Can't do that. Won't do that. Requested transfer back to my unit. It's the only place that makes sense anymore. At least, in combat, you know who you are. Sarah sobbed into her hands. He had refused her to protect his own honor, to stay human, to prove that American soldiers were not the devils Japan had promised. His rejection had been sacrifice, not insult, and she had thought he didn't want her, had carried shame and confusion, not understanding that his refusal was the greatest kindness he could give, the proof that everything she'd been taught was a lie. May 28, 1945, back with the 77th. Back on Okinawa. Shuri line assault, mud everywhere, can't see 10 feet. Buck took shrapnel this morning. Died right in front of me. His last words were, "Tell my girl I," and then nothing. Just gone. The mud doesn't let you go. It's hungry. I think about the Japanese girls sometimes. Hope she's okay. Hope she understands why I had to leave. Hope she doesn't think the entry stopped mid-sentence. The rest of the page was covered in a massive dark stain, brown, stiff. It had soaked through the next 10 pages. Dried blood. Jim's blood. Sarah traced the stain with shaking fingers. This was where he died, writing about her, hoping she was okay, hoping she understood. And she hadn't. She'd thought he rejected her because she was tainted, unworthy, when really he'd rejected her to stay worthy himself. May 29th, 1945. Shuri line. Still raining, still mud. Artillery everywhere. General Buckner keeps pushing. We keep dying, but we're taking the ridges, inch by inch, body by body. Worth it if it ends the war. Worth it if Katie never has to see what I've seen. Worth it if that girl at Crystal City gets to go home someday. Worth it if... More blood. The page torn. The rest unreadable. That was the last entry. Jim Carson had died on May 29, 1945, on the Shuri line in Okinawa, thinking about his sister and a Japanese girl he'd saved and whether any of it meant anything. Sarah clutched the journal to her chest and wept. Not quietly, not carefully. She wept like something inside her had broken. Like the last piece of certainty had shattered. Like the world had revealed itself to be nothing like what she'd been told. He was dead. The man who proved Americans could be kind. Who showed her that honor existed even in war. Who chose to protect her by refusing her. He was dead in the mud of Okinawa, and she was alive in Texas. And it wasn't fair. Nothing about any of it was fair. Outside, the Texas night was quiet. Stars hung in a sky too big to comprehend. Somewhere men were still dying. Somewhere mothers were getting telegrams. Somewhere the war machine ground on. But in a tent in Crystal City, a Japanese girl mourned an American soldier and decided that his story would not become mud. 3 days later, the loudspeakers crackled to life. Static, then a voice. Flat, official. The kind of voice that delivered news that changed the world. Attention, attention all personnel. General Simon Bolivar Buckner, commander of the 10th Army, has been killed by enemy artillery fire on Okinawa. General Buckner died at the front lines. Repeat. General Buckner has been killed in action. The camp went silent. Even the prisoners felt it. The weight. An American general. The man commanding the entire Okinawa invasion, dead. If generals could die, no one was safe. The war was a beast that ate everyone. High and low, Japanese and American. It didn't care about rank or nationality or whether you were good or bad. It just ate. 4 days later, another announcement. Japanese General Ushijima has committed ritual suicide. General Isamu Cho has also committed suicide. The 32nd Army has surrendered. The Battle of Okinawa is over. Allied victory. The war in the Pacific was ending. Japan was losing. The certainty that had sustained the propaganda was crumbling. The divine wind had not come. The certain victory had turned to certain defeat. The emperor's promises had been lies. Sarah saw Mary Tanaka by the water pump. The older woman's face was gray, hollow, empty. All the rigid certainty had evaporated. Her gods were dead. Her leaders had killed themselves rather than face defeat. Everything she'd believed had turned to ash. "What will we do?" Mary whispered. Not to Sarah specifically, just to the universe. "Where will we go?" Sarah looked at her, felt something that might have been pity or might have been recognition. They were both ghosts now, both haunted by the death of the world they'd known. "We will live," Sarah said quietly. Mary stared at her. Why, for what? Sarah had no answer, or not one that Mary would understand. She turned and walked away. Left Mary by the pump, a woman who had lost her faith and found nothing to replace it with. That night, Sarah opened Jim's journal to the inside back cover, found a blank page, picked up a pencil she'd stolen from the supply tent, and wrote, June 23rd, 1945. The war is over. Today they told us we are no longer prisoners. We are displaced civilians. They will help us rebuild. I am alive. I do not know why. I have sorted the letters of 1,000 dead men. I am the only one who knows the story of Corporal James Carson, 77th Infantry Division. He was afraid, he was kind, he was not a devil. He was a soldier. He chose honor over desire. He chose to protect me by refusing me. I will not let his story become mud. I will be the keeper. That is my honor. She closed the journal, pressed it to her heart, made a promise to a dead man who would never know she kept it. 1 week later, the gates of Crystal City opened. Not torn down, just unlocked. The barbed wire was still there, but it was no longer a cage. Just a fence, women lined up for final processing. Lieutenant Cohen stood with a clipboard, reading names, giving assignments. The war was over, but the work of peace was just beginning. Yamamoto Sarah. Sarah stepped forward, held Jim's journal under her shirt. Hidden. Precious. Cohen looked at her with tired eyes. You're assigned to Fort Sam Houston, Medical Auxiliary. You'll assist the nurses with wounded coming back from the Pacific. It's good work, honest work. Try to stay alive, Yamamoto. Try to make something of this second chance. Yes, ma'am. Cohen handed her new identification papers. Civilian, not prisoner, not enemy, just a person trying to survive in a world that had tried very hard to kill her. Sarah walked through the gate into the blinding Texas sun. The landscape stretched forever. Flat, empty, alien. She had no home, no family, no country, just a blood-stained journal and a promise to a dead man. She was 19 years old. She was utterly alone. But she was not broken. She put one foot in front of the other, started walking toward Fort Sam Houston, toward San Antonio, toward a future she couldn't imagine. Behind her, Crystal City faded into the heat shimmer. The watchtower stood empty, a monument to a man who had chosen kindness, who had died proving that even in war, honor could survive. Sarah pressed her hand to her stomach, felt the journal there, warm from her body heat, real, solid, proof. She would be the keeper. She would tell his story. She would make sure the world knew that Corporal James Carson had chosen humanity over hate, had chosen honor over desire, had died believing in something better than the propaganda promised. That was her purpose now. That was why she survived. To remember, to witness, to keep one good man from becoming mud. 3 weeks after walking through the gates of Crystal City, Sarah Yamamoto stood in the records room at Fort Sam Houston Base Hospital in San Antonio, Texas, and learned the difference between hoping someone was dead and knowing for certain. The hospital was massive, white buildings sprawling across acres of Texas scrubland, wards full of men who had survived the Pacific but would carry it with them forever. Amputees learning to walk on prosthetics, burn victims wrapped in bandages, men who stared at walls and flinched at loud noises and woke up screaming about islands whose names Sarah didn't know. She worked as a civilian auxiliary nurse, the lowest rank, the least trusted. She changed bandages, emptied bedpans, fetched supplies, translated when Japanese prisoners of war needed medical care. The work was hard, humbling, but it was honest. And it kept her hands busy enough that she couldn't think too much about the journal hidden under her mattress in the nurse's barracks. Every night she read it, memorizing Jim's words, learning his story, the progression from eager recruit to broken soldier, the way his handwriting changed, got rougher, more desperate, the final entries about her, about hoping she was okay, about dying mid-sentence thinking about whether any of it mattered. She knew he was dead. The journal had been in the crate marked for deceased soldiers. But knowing and confirming were different things. So on a Tuesday afternoon in mid-July, when she was sent to the records room to file patient charts, Sarah made a choice. She looked. The casualty files were organized by division, then alphabetically. She found the 77th Infantry Division section, pulled the drawer marked C, flipped through cards until her fingers stopped on one name. Carson James Michael, Corporal, 77th Infantry Division. Her hands trembled as she pulled the card. Read the typed information. KIA killed in action. May 29, 1945. Shuri Line, Okinawa. Cause of death, artillery fragment. Body recovered. Buried Okinawa American Cemetery plot. 47. Row 12, grave 8. There was a photograph attached, a small black and white personnel photo. Jim in dress uniform, young, solemn, staring at the camera like he was trying to see into the future, trying to see if the person looking back would think he'd done okay. Sarah traced his face with one finger. She'd only seen him clearly once, during the storm, mud-streaked, rain-soaked, eyes full of horror at himself, at what he'd almost become. This photo showed a different Jim, cleaner, younger, but the eyes were the same, tired eyes, old eyes in a young face. The card confirmed what the journal had told her. Jim Carson was dead, had died the same day he wrote his last entry, had died thinking about his sister Katie and a Japanese girl he barely knew, and whether saving one person could balance the weight of all the ones he couldn't save. Sarah carefully returned the card to its place, filed her patient charts, walked back to her ward with steady steps, didn't let herself break until her shift ended, and she was alone in the barracks bathroom with the door locked and water running to cover the sound of crying. 2 days later, she met the man who had watched Jim die. Corporal Danny Martinez was 24 years old and missing his left leg from the knee down. The doctor said he was lucky. The artillery fragment that took his leg had missed the femoral artery by inches. He'd survived the initial wound, survived the evac, survived the infection that killed so many amputees. Now he was learning to walk again, learning to live with the ghost of a limb he could still feel. Sarah was assigned to his ward rotation, changing dressings, checking for infection, helping him practice with the crutches he hated. "You're good at this," Martinez said one afternoon. His English was accented, Texas Mexican, musical almost. "Most of the nurses, they look at us like we're broken. You just see work to be done." "You are not broken," Sarah said. Her English was much better now. Still accented, still careful, but functional. "You are healing." "Healing, sure, that's one word for it." He shifted on the bed, winced. The phantom pain was bad today. "You ever lose something? Not like a leg, but something that mattered." Sarah thought about Jim, about the journal, about the moment in the storm when she'd felt human for the first time in months and then had it ripped away. "Yes," she said quietly, "I have lost something." Martinez studied her face, saw something there. "You were a prisoner right at Crystal City." "Yes." "My cousin was a guard there, said it wasn't so bad, said they treated the prisoners decent, fed them good, kept them safe." Sarah nodded. It was not bad. The guards were kind, mostly. Mostly, she didn't answer, just focused on rewrapping his stump. The wound was healing clean, pink new skin forming. In a few weeks, he'd be fitted for a prosthetic, would learn to walk again, would go home to whoever was waiting. I knew a guy from Crystal City, Martinez said suddenly. Guard who got rotated back to our unit right before the end. Good kid, Texas boy, corporal, always talking about his little sister back in San Antonio. Sarah's hand stilled on the bandage. What was his name? Carson, Jimmy Carson, came back to us in late May, just in time for the worst of Shuri. Kid didn't have to come back. Could have stayed stateside, but he volunteered, said his buddies were still fighting, said he needed to be with his unit. The room tilted. Sarah gripped the edge of the bed to steady herself. Did you know him? Martinez asked. Did you see him at the camp? I saw him, Sarah managed. He was a guard. I did not speak to him. He was a good guy, best kind of soldier, the kind who cared too much. You could see it wearing on him. All the death, all the waste. But he kept going, kept doing his job, kept trying to save people. Sarah's throat closed. She couldn't speak, could barely breathe. Martinez continued, not noticing her distress. He died pulling Sergeant Wheeler out of a shell crater. Buck was already gone, took shrapnel to the chest. But Jimmy didn't know, tried to drag him to safety. Another shell landed, got them both. The words fell like stones, each one heavy, final. They said Jimmy didn't feel anything, Martinez added, trying to be kind, trying to offer comfort. Fragment hit him in the back, probably dead before he knew what happened. That's something right better than bleeding out in the mud. Sarah nodded, couldn't trust her voice. You okay? Martinez asked. You look pale. I am fine, just tired. We'll get some rest. Can't have my favorite nurse collapsing on me. Sarah finished the bandage, gathered her supplies, walked out of the ward on legs that didn't quite feel attached to her body. Jim had died saving someone. Of course he had. That's who he was. The man who gave chocolate to prisoners, who watched over a Japanese girl because she reminded him of his sister, who chose honor over desire because taking advantage would have made him the monster the propaganda promised. Of course he died trying to save someone, even someone who was already dead, even when it cost him everything. That night, Sarah made a decision. Jim had a family, a sister named Katie, parents who raised him on a ranch outside San Antonio, people who got a telegram saying killed in action, but nothing else. No details, no story, no truth about who their son was and what he'd done and why it mattered. They deserved to know. And Sarah was the only one who could tell them. The journal had an address on the inside cover, written in Jim's careful handwriting. Next of kin information. Carson Ranch Route 5 outside San Antonio, Texas, only 40 miles away. Sarah could visit in person, could knock on their door, could say, I knew your son. I have his journal. He saved my life. But the thought terrified her. What if they hated her? What if they saw a Japanese face and remembered Pearl Harbor? What if they blamed her for Jim coming back to the war? For his death, a letter was safer. A letter could be ignored, burned, forgotten. A letter didn't demand a response. Sarah sat at the small desk in the nurse's barracks, pulled out paper, a pen, began to write. The words came slowly, each sentence carefully constructed. She rewrote it 4 times before she was satisfied. August 15th, 1945. Fort Sam Houston, Texas. Dear Miss Katie Carson, my name is Sarah Yamamoto. I do not know if you will want to read this letter. I was a Japanese prisoner at Crystal City internment camp in Texas. Your brother James was a guard there before he returned to Okinawa. I understand I am your enemy, but I am also the person who has your brother's journal. She explained how she found it, in the crate of personal effects, blood-stained, among items from deceased soldiers. She explained that she should have turned it in, but it couldn't, because it was his story, his truth, and someone needed to know. Your brother wrote about you many times. He loved you very much. He said you were his reason for fighting, to keep you safe. He worried about you every day. She told Katie about the entries, about Jim's progression from eager recruit to traumatized soldier, about the woman with the razor who haunted him, about his guilt at being safe while his unit died. He also wrote about me. He watched over me in the camp because I reminded him of you. He was afraid I would disappear like other people he saw in the war. He saved my life during a storm. I did something shameful. I tried to kiss him. Kiss. He refused me. Not because he thought I was dirty or bad, because he wanted to stay a good man. Sarah's hands shook as she wrote the next part, the most important part. He wrote in his journal, I would rather face a machine gun than betray the trust in her eyes. Miss Katie, your brother died a hero. Other soldiers told me he died trying to save his friend, Sergeant Wheeler. But more than that, he was a kind man in the middle of a cruel war. He showed me that Americans are not devils like Japanese propaganda said. He showed me that honor can be a quiet thing, a choice made in the dark when no one is watching. She offered to return the journal, said it belonged to the Carson family, that she was only keeping it safe until they wanted it. I am very sorry for your loss. I am sorry for my country's war. Your brother showed me what real honor looks like. He was a good man. You should know this from someone who saw it. Respectfully, Sarah Yamamoto. She sealed the letter, addressed it, walked to the post office on base the next morning, and dropped it in the mail slot before she could change her mind. Then she waited. 1 week passed, then 2. August rolled into September. The war in the Pacific ended officially. Japan surrendered. VJ Day celebrations erupted across America. Sailors kissed girls in city squares. Confetti rained from buildings. The nightmare was over. Sarah watched from a hospital window, saw soldiers celebrating, saw civilians crying with joy, felt nothing except a hollow ache where certainty used to live. The war was over, but Jim was still dead. The woman with the razor was still dead. All the boys in the records room with KIA on their cards were still dead. Victory didn't resurrect them. It just meant their deaths had purchased something. Whether that something was worth the price remained to be seen. Sarah assumed Katie had ignored the letter, or burned it, or shown it to her parents who decided they wanted nothing to do with a Japanese woman claiming to have known their son. Then on August 30th, Sarah's supervisor found her during afternoon rounds. Yamamoto, someone's here to see you. Civilian, waiting in the lobby. Sarah's heart hammered. Who? Didn't say, young woman, blonde, said it was personal. Sarah walked to the lobby on legs that felt like water, pushed through the double doors, saw a girl sitting on a bench, 18 years old, blonde hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, blue eyes red from crying, wearing a simple cotton dress and cowboy boots. She held Sarah's letter in trembling hands. She looked exactly like Jim. Same nose, same stubborn chin, same eyes that had seen too much and were trying very hard to stay strong. Katie Carson stood up. Are you Sarah Yamamoto? Sarah nodded, couldn't speak. Katie's face crumpled, then firmed. She crossed the lobby in 3 steps and hugged Sarah. Not a polite hug, a desperate one. The kind that says I'm drowning and you're the only solid thing in the world. Thank you, Katie whispered against Sarah's shoulder. Thank you for writing. Thank you for keeping him safe. Thank you for telling me the truth. Sarah stood frozen, then slowly raised her arms, hugged this girl back, this stranger who was Jim's sister, who had loved him, who had waited for him, who would never see him again. They stood in the hospital lobby and cried together. 2 young women who had lost the same man for different reasons, who carried different pieces of his story, who needed each other to make the whole. When they finally pulled apart, Katie wiped her eyes. I want to hear everything. Will you come to the ranch, meet my parents? They need to hear this too. Your parents will hate me. I am Japanese. You knew Jimmy. You kept his memory. That makes you family. The word hit Sarah like a physical blow. Family. She hadn't had family since leaving Japan. Since the war scattered everyone to the winds. Since she became a ghost moving through an enemy country with nothing but a blood-stained journal and a promise to a dead man. I will come, Sarah said. Katie drove a battered pickup truck, her father's truck. She drove fast, one hand in the other hand gripping Sarah's letter like a lifeline. When we got the telegram, it just said killed in action, Katie said. Her voice was steady now, controlled, like she'd used up all her tears and had none left. We didn't know how, didn't know if he suffered, Didn't know what he was thinking, and at the end, your letter. It was the first time I understood what he went through, what he became, who he was when he died. I am sorry for your loss. Don't apologize. You didn't kill him, the war did. Katie glanced at Sarah. Did he really refuse you in the storm? Sarah felt heat rise in her cheeks. Yes, I was shameful. I threw myself at him. He pushed me away, told me to go. I thought he was disgusted, but the journal said he was trying to stay honorable, to not become the monster. That's Jimmy, always trying to do the right thing, even when it cost him. They drove in silence for a while. The landscape outside was pure Texas, flat, brown, endless. So different from Japan, so alien. Yet somehow Sarah was starting to understand it. The sky too big to lie under, the horizon too far to reach, the sense that you could drive forever and never escape yourself. Your brother saved my life, Sarah said quietly. Not once, but many times. With food, with watching, with the storm. But most of all by refusing me. By proving that Americans could choose honor over desire. Without that proof, I think I would have died anyway. Just slower, from the inside. Katie's hands tightened on the wheel. He would be glad to know that. Jimmy always wanted to save people. It ate at him. All the ones he couldn't save. All the ones who died before he could reach them. If he saved you, even just your spirit, that would matter to him. The Carson Ranch appeared as the sun started its descent toward the horizon. A modest spread, weathered buildings, corrals with horses, a windmill turning slowly in the breeze. The main house was small, practical, the kind of place built by people who valued function over form. Katie parked the truck. My folks are going to be surprised. I didn't tell them you were coming. Figured it was easier to ask forgiveness than permission. They will be angry. Probably, but they'll listen. And once they hear what you have to say, they'll understand. Mr. and Mrs. Carson were in the kitchen when Katie pushed open the screen door. They looked up, saw their daughter, then saw the Japanese girl behind her. Mrs. Carson's face went white. Mr. Carson stood up so fast his chair scraped the floor. Katie, what in God's name is this? This is Sarah Yamamoto, Katie said quickly. Her voice was firm, brooking no argument. She knew Jimmy. She has his journal. She's the one who sent me the letter. And she's staying for dinner. Mr. Carson was maybe 55, weathered, strong. A man who'd worked cattle and land his whole life. His face showed every year, every hard season, every loss. You brought a Jap into our house? His voice was low, dangerous. I brought the woman who kept Jimmy's memory alive, Katie shot back. The woman who knew what kind of man he was at the end. The woman who has his journal because she was sorting dead soldiers' personal effects and stole it to keep his story safe. Mrs. Carson moved forward, slower, more careful, her eyes on Sarah, on assessing. You have James's journal. Sarah nodded, pulled the small green book from her bag, unwrapped it from its protective cloth, held it out with both hands. This belongs to your family now. I should have turned it in, but I could not. He wrote about you, about Katie, about the ranch, about what he was fighting for. His story should not be in a filing cabinet. It should be here. Mrs. Carson took the journal with shaking hands, opened it to a random page, saw Jim's handwriting, his words, proof that he'd been alive, that he'd thought and felt and written things down. She pressed the journal to her chest and sobbed. Mr. Carson's face worked, anger and grief and confusion battling for dominance. Why should we believe you? Why should we trust anything you say? Because I loved him too. The words came out before Sarah could stop them. Not as you loved him, not as Katie loved him, but I loved him for what he showed me. That honor exists. That kindness is possible even in war. That choosing to be good matters more than winning. Katie put her arm around Sarah's shoulders. She's telling the truth, Pa. I can feel it. Read the journal. You'll see. That night, the Carson family sat at their kitchen table and read Jim's journal aloud, taking turns, passing it between them. Then Carson read the early entries, the hopeful ones, the ones about enlisting and basic training and promises to come home. Mr. Carson read the combat entries, his voice breaking on the descriptions of death, of killing, of the boy with his mother's photo, of the woman with the razor. Katie read the entries about Sarah, about watching her, about wanting to save someone, about the chocolate and the storm and the kiss, and the terrible choice between desire and honor. I would rather face a Nambu machine gun than betray the trust in her eyes, Katie read. Her voice was steady, strong. That's who you are, Jimmy. That's what you chose. I'm proud of you. When they reached the final entries, the blood-stained pages, Mrs. Carson read them. The words about Sergeant Wheeler, about hoping Sarah was okay, about whether any of it mattered. The journal ended mid-sentence. In blood, in death, in the middle of trying to say something that would never be finished. They sat in silence when the reading was done. The journal lay open on the table. Proof of a life, evidence of choices made in darkness. Mr. Carson finally spoke. His voice was rough, raw. He stayed good, even over there, even after everything. He stayed good. Yes, Sarah said quietly. He did. Mrs. Carson looked at Sarah, really looked at her, saw not an enemy, not a symbol, just a girl, 19 years old, alone in a foreign country, carrying the memory of a boy who'd shown her kindness. Where will you go? Mrs. Carson asked. After the hospital, when your work is done, where will you go? I do not know. I have job now, but after, Sarah shrugged. I have nowhere, no family, no home. Japan does not want me back. I surrendered. That is unforgivable. Mrs. Carson and Mr. Carson exchanged a look, one of those married looks that communicates volumes without words. You could stay here, Mrs. Carson said slowly. We have the guest room. James's room is... She couldn't finish. But the guest room, you could stay. Work in San Antonio. Come back here when you are not working. I am Japanese. People will talk. Let them talk, Katie said fiercely. You're family now. You kept Jimmy's story. You made sure we knew who he really was. That makes you one of us. Mr. Carson nodded slowly. My wife's right. You kept our boy's memory alive. Least we can do is give you a place to belong. Sarah looked at these people, these strangers who had every reason to hate her, who had lost their son to a war her country started, who should have thrown her out, who instead were offering her a home. I accept, she whispered. Thank you. Mrs. Carson stood, crossed to Sarah, pulled her into a hug that smelled like flour and soap and something that might have been forgiveness. Welcome home, she said. 1 year later, Sarah Yamamoto stood in the Carson Ranch kitchen making coffee, real coffee, strong and black the way Mr. Carson liked it, the way Jim had drunk it in his watchtower while writing in his journal about a Japanese girl who reminded him of his sister. She'd been living at the ranch for 10 months now, working at Fort Sam Houston during the week, coming home to the ranch on weekends, learning to ride horses, learning to speak English without hesitation, learning to be American without forgetting she was Japanese. It wasn't easy. San Antonio in 1946 still had wounds, still remembered Pearl Harbor. Sarah faced stares, whispers, occasional cruelty, a shopkeeper who refused to serve her, a man who spat at her feet and called her Jap. But the Carsons stood beside her. Mr. Carson, who told the shopkeeper exactly what he thought of men who held grudges against girls. Katie, who punched the man who spat. Mrs. Carson, who quietly made sure everyone at church knew that Sarah was family, and anyone who had a problem with that could take it up with her. Slowly, grudgingly, San Antonio made room for her. The grocery store stopped watching her like she might steal. The post office clerk learned her name. The neighbors stopped staring. She was becoming part of the landscape, not Japanese anymore, not quite American yet, something in between, something new. Sarah maintained a shrine in her room, not Buddhist, not Christian, something else. Jim's photo from his personnel file, his Purple Heart, which the family had given her a copy of, the journal carefully preserved in a glass case, fresh Texas bluebonnets every week from the fields around the ranch. This was her purpose, to remember, to keep his story alive, to make sure one good man didn't disappear into the mud of history. Katie had started teaching at a local school. She invited Sarah to speak to her class about the war, about what it was like to be on the other side, about how propaganda worked, about learning that enemies were human. War makes enemies of people who could be friends, Sarah told the children. 40 faces staring at her with curiosity and a little fear. Corporal Carson chose to see me as human, not as enemy. That choice saved my life, not just my body, my spirit. He showed me that honor is not about being strong. Honor is about being kind when you could be cruel. A boy in the back raised his hand. Did you love him? Sarah considered the question. I did not know him long enough for romantic love, but I honor him. I will make sure people remember what he did. That is my love now, memory love, the kind that lasts forever. The children were silent, thinking, processing, learning that war was more complicated than good guys and bad guys, that enemies were people, that choices mattered. After the presentation, Sarah and Katie drove to San Antonio, to a memorial dedication. The city was unveiling a monument to the 77th Infantry Division. 200 names etched in marble, boys from Texas who died in the Pacific. The Carson family attended together. Sarah wore her nursing auxiliary uniform. Official now, recognized. She stood with Mr. and Mrs. Carson and Katie, holding Katie's hand, watching veterans in dress uniforms salute the dead. Some people stared. A Japanese woman at an American memorial. It wasn't right. It wasn't proper. But then Corporal Danny Martinez appeared, walking on a prosthetic leg, moving slow but moving. He saw Sarah. Recognition lit his face. You're the girl, he said. From the hospital. Jimmy Carson's girl. I am not his girl, but I knew him. He wrote about you, in letters to Katie, said he'd met someone who reminded him why we fight. Not just to win, to stay human, to prove we're better than what the enemy thinks we are. Sarah's throat closed. Jim had written about her, had told his sister, had made her part of his story. Thank you for telling me this, she managed. Martinez nodded, saluted Jim's name on the marble, walked away. That evening, Sarah drove alone to the cemetery on the edge of the Carson property, the family plot where generations of Carsons lay under Texas soil. There was a headstone for Jim. Empty grave. His body was in Okinawa, but the stone said he was here too, with his people. Corporal James Michael Carson, 1922 to 1945. Beloved son and brother. Sarah knelt, placed fresh bluebonnets at the base of the stone, spoke to him in English now, fluid, natural. Jim, I do not know if you can hear me, but I speak anyway. You showed me the propaganda was lies. Americans are not devils. Japanese are not fanatics. We are all just people trying to survive. You refused me to stay a good man. That was your honor. I keep your honor alive. This is my honor now. Katie and your parents gave me family. Enemy became family. Maybe this is what you wanted, to build bridges instead of burning them. I am keeper of your story. I will tell it until I am old woman. I will make sure people know. One soldier chose humanity over hate, chose honor over desire. You died too young, but you died it as a good man. I will make sure the world remembers. Rest well, Corporal Carson. You earned it. She stood, wiped tears, turned toward the ranch house. The sun was setting, painting the Texas sky in colors that hurt to look at, gold and orange and purple and red. The land stretched forever. The horizon pulled at the edges of the world. Light glowed in the kitchen window. Mrs. Carson cooking dinner. Mr. Carson reading the paper. Katie practicing her lesson plans. Family. Home. The things Jim had fought for. The things he'd died protecting. Sarah walked toward that light, toward the people who had taken in their enemy and made her their own. Toward a future Jim would never see but had helped create. She was no longer a ghost, no longer invisible. She had a place, a purpose, a story to tell, the keeper of honor, the bridge between enemies. The living proof that even in the darkest war, one man's choice to be kind could echo across generations. Sarah Yamamoto Carson. That was her name now. American by choice, Japanese by birth, human by the grace of a soldier who'd shown her what that word really meant. She opened the screen door, stepped into warmth and light and the smell of pot roast. Mrs. Carson looked up, smiled. "Welcome home, Sarah." "I am home," Sarah said, and meant it. 70 years later, long after Sarah had passed, the journal would still exist, protected by the Carson family, shown to grandchildren and great-grandchildren. A testament to the moment when enemy became human, when propaganda crumbled against the reality of kindness, when one Texas cowboy chose honor and one Japanese girl chose to remember. The story of Corporal James Carson and Sarah Yamamoto became legend in San Antonio, told in schools, shared at veteran gatherings, a reminder that even in war we remain human, that our choices matter. That honor is not about winning. It's about staying good when everything around you has gone bad. And in a small cemetery on a Texas ranch, bluebonnets still grow wild around a headstone, planted by Sarah 60 years ago, tended by her children, by her grandchildren, by a family that started with an enemy and ended with love, because that's what Jim had wanted. That's what he died believing in, not victory, not conquest, not revenge, just the quiet triumph of human dignity over the machinery of death, just the stubborn insistence that we can choose to be better, that kindness matters, that honor survives, even in the mud, even in the darkness, even when the world is ending. One man chose to be good, one woman chose to remember, and from that choice a bridge was built that would last forever. This is their story, this is their honor. This is why we remember. If this story moved, you share it. Tell someone about Corporal James Carson and Sarah Yamamoto. Because in a world that still builds walls, we need to remember the bridges. We need to remember that enemies are just people we haven't understood yet. That honor is a choice we make every day. That one act of kindness can echo across a lifetime. Thank you for listening. Thank you for remembering. Thank you for keeping the story alive. Because that's what Sarah would have wanted. That's what Jim died believing in. That memory matters. That we matter. That our choices to be human, to be kind, to be honorable, those choices never die. They just wait for someone to remember them. Someone to tell the story. Someone to keep the light burning. Now you are the keeper too. Remember them well.